Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second official episode of the Sleepin' with Steve podcast. Podcast that is designed to help you fall asleep and stay asleep by the effect of me reading you historical events that you may not have known about prior to the podcast. Maybe you did, and now you know. You're just able to listen in and gain a few more insights on some of the occurrences that have happened in the past. So today we're going to be talking about the race for the South Pole, and this is a warning, actually, for the listeners out there tonight. I'm going to have significant trouble pronouncing a lot of words, specifically Scandinavian names, locations, and ship names. So bear with me, and we'll get through it together. So, a little bit about the show first. I decided to start up this podcast because, I really enjoy history, and I think that it's something that sometimes gets overlooked when thinking about topics that you cover in school or that you think about. It seems like nowadays most people are engineers or STEM majors, and that seems to hold the most value, maybe an architect. But to me, even though I'm not a history major, I really find that history is a really fun subject that can teach you a lot about what's going on in the world today, and even influence events that could happen in the future. Or maybe there are some events that are connected that you may not have known about. So I really find that learning more and digging deep into sort of the obscure moments and events that occurred in the past can really enrich your understanding of the world today and can maybe change the way that you see some things. So, I would also like to say that this podcast is broken up into 3 parts. Right now we're in part 1. And part 1 is simply the intro, which is me telling you about the structure of the podcast and just giving you kind of the rundown of how it's supposed to go. So we have the intro, and then I'm going to get into probably about 10 or 15 minutes worth of tangents and just kind of things that are on my mind to allow you, the listener, the valued listener, to kind of settle down or find your spot to listen to this podcast. And that could be anywhere, really. The main goal, like I said earlier, was to really emphasize that listening to the show can, the main goal, I guess, is to have you fall asleep by the end of the show, which is going to run roughly between 45 minutes to an hour. And I think that is enough time to find that you can unwind a little bit and not really even listen to me. I would suggest that if you want to learn more about the history of the story involved here, which is the race to the South Pole, I would consider maybe skipping forward to maybe the 15-minute mark. to get into the meat of the story. So, for the time being, I'm going to be speaking about what I'm going to do to help you get in the right mental state to, consume this podcast. And you won't be consuming it with your mouth like food, but this time we'll be consuming this information with our ears. And I'm really happy to have you here, but I kind of went off on a tangent there and forgot what I was talking about. So basically, we got the intro, and then we got this where, oh yeah, I remember now. So it was me telling you guys that you can take this time here to settle down and maybe find a spot where you'd like to listen to the show. Whether it's in bed or out on your sunroom, and you're just looking to relax because you only have an hour and a half until class comes, and you just want to take your mind off of the craziness that's going on in the world today. I'm here for you to do that. And like I was saying, you don't need to necessarily really listen to what I'm saying if you don't want to. If you're primarily here to fall asleep, you could even just kind of listen without listening as a sort of white noise, or you could treat it like you're in history class and there's a 400-person lecture and you woke up a little bit late, so you had to run to class, but now you're feeling the effects and your coffee's wearing off, and the teacher is just talking and talking, and for some reason she put the slides up, but she's just talking over the slides. I don't even know why she put them up if she was going to say it anyways. She could have just skipped the whole lecture if you ask me, but I'm not here to discuss that. That's neither here nor there. What I am here to discuss is the race for Antarctica, or the South Pole. Not to be confused with the North Pole, which is where Santa Claus lives. The North Pole's a bit more famous than the South Pole. The South Pole doesn't really have a whole lot going for it, but we'll get into that as the show goes on. I just really am happy that you guys are here, and I would just like to say thanks for tuning in, and I'm happy to be able to help out on your journey to find Zen in the form of me speaking like this. For those of you who are listening, that know me personally, once again, thank you. And I know that you really enjoy the delivery of the show. I do this in a way so that I can help induce people to fall asleep. And, this kind of takes me back to personal experience, not only with the history class. Yeah, that's true. That's happened one or two many times for me. But also just because I have trouble sleeping myself, and I need to have some sort of noise in the background, whether it be a television or just, pop in my earphones. I don't have AirPods. I don't know why I was going to say that. But pop in some headphones and just kind of listen to videos, but without really paying attention. But paying attention's okay. I won't hold it against you if you somehow make it through this entire show. If you do, one, congratulations. I think that shows great strength of character, and I wonder how you would be able to do in interrogations, because this is like a mental interrogation, basically, of the senses, where I seriously doubt that anybody could listen to this like 80% of the way, 83% of the way through without feeling a little bit tired and getting a little Mr. Sandman dropping his sand in your eyes. I don't really get that anyways. Sandman, where did that come from? Like, for one, if anybody was pouring sand into my eyes, I don't think I'd feel sleepy. One, I'd be pretty angry, disgusted even. And two, I'd be wishing that I had one of those science room eye wash stations that I was always afraid to use because I had contacts in. But regardless of that, if you do make it through, thank you for committing yourself to it and for wanting to learn more about history. And like I said earlier, if you want to just get to the story, you could skip to the probably like the 15-minute mark, and we will be embarking on our journey southwards. No, I'm just kidding. We will be embarking on our journey to Antarctica and sleepy time together. This meandering and the voice is, I find it to be a good tactic to helping induce people to feel that they are going to feel a little sleepy, and excuse me if there are any interruptions. I apologize, but it's pretty difficult to speak like this for an hour straight. I tend to do these shows in one take, and when I say I tend to, I mean I did one show in one take. So far, so good. Undefeated, undisputed, world champion, nonsense talk, Mr. 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking right at it. Well, I guess you're not really looking at me. I don't have a camera setup going on. So I guess you're listening to the 2020 undisputed heavyweight. I guess you guys could believe that. Middleweight champion of the airwaves of sleep. So, with that, sorry about that harsh audio. So, with that, let's get into the story. So, before we get into that, false start, flag on the play, 5-yard penalty. Steve, back it up. I'm going to get into the who, what, when, where, and why of this story. Now, this episode, I actually got the who, what, when, where, and why in order instead of last week when it was, I believe, who, when, what, where, why, which doesn't quite roll off the tongue as naturally. So here we go. The parties involved are Roald Amundsen. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. I had a buddy, actually last year, he was in my film class. He was Swedish, so I guess this is, I guess Norway and Sweden have pretty similar inflections. So he would be pretty upset with me if he heard me saying this, but as of right now, I think we're gonna be okay. I don't think he's gonna be too upset. Good guy. But anyways, the who is Roald Amundsen, and the 4 members of his exploration team. And then we have Mr. Robert Falcon Scott and his 4 others who would make up his primary exploratory team, although he did arrive with a much larger group. I'd like to take the time to point out that Falcon is a fantastic middle name. That's kind of akin to if you asked a 4th grader what their middle name was and they said Danger, and you said, well, that's stupid. Your name's not really Danger. Your parents would have been total idiots to name you that, knowing that if your name was Danger, you'd probably go on to be a stuntman or do something crazy. Get the ATF called on you, perhaps. Well, believe it, folks, because it's true. Mr. Robert Scott has Falcon as his middle name, so we know that he is going to be courageous in his flight down south, his migration, if you will. So, along with that, we have some other players, including Frigtof Nansen, who was another Norwegian explorer who had previously worked with Amundsen. And we have King Oscar, ladies and gentlemen. Give it up for King Oscar. He was the king of Norway at the time, and he would be a financer of the expedition. Now, today we're going to mainly focus on the Norwegian perspective here. So that'll be more focused on Mr. Amundsen than Mr. Scott, at least in the background information. But as far as the actual trip on the old ice block, we'll talk about both. So, the what is the race to see who could claim the South Pole for their country first. And, after this is only after the North Pole, famous land of mystery and presence, had been claimed by the Americans a little bit earlier. So this story takes place, pardon me, roughly between, it's just the early 1900s, but the year that we're going to mainly focus on is 1911. Where is... If you can't guess by now, you're either asleep or you haven't been paying attention, and shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. It is Antarctica. And why they did this, you may ask, is, well, that's a good question. I don't think that if you asked maybe anyone that you've ever met or will meet or even care to meet, that they would say that they would like to go to Antarctica. I mean, besides that March of the Penguins movie, there's not really much that goes on down there. I guess there's some leopard seals. If you're a fan of leopard seals, consider this your shout out. I can't imagine that comes very often, but there you go. I see you. So they did this for the glory and the honor of being the first to claim it for their country. And, back in the times before, well, I guess you could, they're modern times, but, not kind of semi-modern. This was a time highlighted by exploration and, land grabs. We've seen it throughout history, obviously, but an example that ties kind of closely to this time frame would be America's westward expansion through Manifest Destiny, which is a completely different topic. But we're not afraid to get into different topics here, while staying kind of close to the skeleton of what this podcast is really about, which is the race for the South Pole. So let's begin, shall we? Gotta get ready. So, Roald Amundsen was born in Fredrikstad, which is now Oslo, Norway, in the year 1872. And he was the son of a ship owner. So in the Scandinavian the Scandinavian region, that's kind of a big deal, because that means that obviously these are peninsulas, and they get to travel around to maybe trade or go exploring, which is exactly what Amundsen would grow up to do. So in the year 1893, he gave up his medical studies and signed up to be a seaman aboard the ship, the Magdalena, on a voyage set for the Arctic. After several of his voyages, he was qualified to be a second mate, and when he wasn't on the water, he was a very accomplished skier in Norway's harsh environments. We will see this too affect him and his journey to the South Pole. In many ways, his childhood would greatly impact the events that would occur in the later years. So, in 1896, Amundsen was inspired by the Arctic adventures of a certain Fridtjof Nansen, who was also from Norway. So, Amundsen joined a Antarctic expedition as a mate on the ship Belgica, that's what it is, Belgica, under a Captain Adrian de Gerlach. It's Gerlache, Gerlach. Well, he's not that important. So he joined the ship under this guy, and in 1898, the ship actually got trapped in a pack of ice, and as a result, they were stuck for almost a year, actually, which is pretty insane. I know in the last episode I talked about how the people at Waco, the authorities made them camp out for basically 51 days, and I compared that to the quarantine right now, which isn't quite there, but that's nothing to being stuck on a ship in the middle of a frozen ocean in Antarctica for nearly a year. That sounds like you should sign up, a movie for it, like 127 hours, something like that. Call Hollywood, get them on the horn. So basically, this trip was a disaster, and the crewmates were experiencing things like scurvy, depression, obviously, insanity, and they almost starved. I can't imagine what they had to do to get by, but I can't imagine also that it would be very fun. So he eventually got out of there, and they came back to Norway, and even though it wasn't quite the trip that they had hoped for, they sparked off the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, which is a fancy way to say a time when a bunch of other countries wanted to cash in on the glory and the fame of, the notoriety that comes with being able to plant your flag on an unexplored frozen tundra. So after his experience on the Belgica, Amundsen turned his sights north and planned on traversing through the legendary Northwest Passage. Now, the Northwest Passage was a series of straits and, passages that existed in the northern Canadian islands, and it was near the North Pole, so it was uncharted at the time, and it connected the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And yeah, that's important for trading routes. If you didn't have that, I guess you could go through Panama Canal, which excuse me, Mr. History, it wasn't the Panama Canal built after this. Quite frankly, I don't remember. So, don't hold it to me, guys. But you would either have to go all the way around South America or maybe cut through the Panama Canal. So this was a very important discovery for an achievement, more so for the Europeans, considering that they wouldn't have to take as much time to make it to the Pacific Ocean. So this voyage started in 1903 and ended in 1906 with Amundsen becoming a national hero and a legendary explorer at the ripe old age of 34. That's pretty cool, if you ask me. I think his experience on the Belgica and as a mate on other voyages really, allowed him to hone his ability as an explorer. And, this was the big test, and he passed it. And, I'm not sure if 34, how that is. Like, they say 40 is the new 30 nowadays. But I don't know if, 30 was, today's 60 back then. Times were tough. So anyways, besides the point, in 1909, Amundsen decided to make plans to navigate the waters near the North Pole, but he later secretly changed his plans and decided to go to the South Pole after the North had already been claimed by American explorers. Who were they? Here it is. After it was claimed by American explorers Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, and both of them on separate teams claimed to have claimed the North Pole. They claimed their claim. And so he changed his plans, and he didn't even tell his crew or his financial backers until he had already left. And, at that point, what are you going to do? If you're on the ship, it's ride or die. I feel a little bad for the bankers. Old King Oscar, giving them the funds to go down there on this very expensive trip, but, it would end up. No, I won't spoil the end, actually. So they were on their way to the South Pole. So at the time, Amundsen sent a letter to British explorer Mr. Robert Falcon Scott, informing him of his intent to explore the Antarctic. And Scott was on his way to explore parts of Australia at the time, and he saw this as a bit of a challenge and decided to, go down and beat the already well-off established Amundsen, who had acquired legendary status through his prior voyages, So before long, the newspapers began to tell tales about the race for the South Pole, and this just stoked up the hype. It's like, stoked it up for discovering the formidable new continent. Well, not new, I suppose, but nobody had really gone there. Or if they had been there, they hadn't been all the way to the southernmost point on the planet, which is the main goal. It wasn't just about landing in Antarctica, it was about claiming the polar south. Where it's opposite land of the North Pole. And so Scott's English team sent in their order. They were sent there in order to make scientific explorations, as well as collecting samples on wildlife and plant life. I know, what a joke. I already said March of the Penguins and leopard seals, and that's about all they got. So he went down there to collect samples. That was what the British government allowed him to go down and do, along with his trek to the South Pole. And, Amundsen, however, he simply wanted to explore the area and come home safely. Amundsen would later remark that science would have to look after itself. Bold words from a bold man, I know. But, when it comes down to it, they went down for the same reason, but Scott was a little bit hindered by his scientific exploration, as well as just wanting to go down and claim the pole. So they both made it down, and both parties spent several months lying down supply cakes, caches, once again, this word comes to haunt me. They put down supply dumps for themselves, and so they could come back on their journey. So, if they went to the pole and then they're coming back and running low on supplies, they could, find their marked area and have a wealth of goods, a cornucopia of treats, if you will. They get the munchies down there, maybe, who knows. But they both stayed put for several months until a particularly harsh and dark winter would pass over the area. Amundsen, however, did try to get a head start on the race, and as a result, he was pushed back due to the temperatures being minus 68 degrees in September. So he waited until October 20th to send himself and his 4 other person team, which was led by Dog Sled, to get to the heart of the continent. Scott would actually wait a little bit longer and would begin his trip on November 1st. So Scott's outfit was given dogs, Manchurian ponies, and even some motorized tractors to, help him with the journey. But the tractors quickly broke down in the cold, and the horses would also have to be killed or, just put down for the food and out of mercy because of the damage that they took on the continent due to the harsh climate. Manchuria is definitely a cold place, but I wouldn't compare it to Antarctica necessarily. You could say that Scott was more well prepared. However, Amundsen only used sled dogs as well as skis on his equipment, and all of his companions used skis as well. And this really helped them move quickly around the terrain. He also would have to kill off the weakest dogs for food eventually as it grew kind of desperate. But, thanks to his experience as a very good skier in Norway and the dog teams, Amundsen's party actually managed to get to the pole at a pace of over 20 miles a day, which is pretty good. Considering they didn't stop much, that's pretty fast. I can't imagine that it was ideal conditions. You're in the South Pole, for God's sake. But another thing is that the Norwegians took a route that was untested before, quite like the Northwest Passage, and it forced them to go around a maze of crevasses, mountains, and glaciers. But, by early December, they had gotten further into Antarctica than anybody had ever been before in history, unless you include the aliens from Alien vs. Predator, who got there much before. But they're not really people. Nah, they're not people. If anything, they're CGI, but definitely not people. So Amundsen would write that, this felt like being a little kid, essentially the night before Christmas. You're just getting ready for Santa to come and the expectations of what was going to happen next. And I think that's a little ironic, a little jab at Santa Claus even for Amundsen not being able to claim the North Pole. I think he was a little upset, but no need to go after the round man for that one. Rolled. And finally, on December 14th, 1911, him and his companions arrived at the South Pole. So they planted the flag, and, they had a big old party. They took pictures, and they remained there for several days before beginning their rough trek back to their base camp. Amundsen would later write, "The goal was reached. Our journey ended." But little did he know the journey was, only beginning for, not really. I guess the journey was maybe not even halfway done. Now that's kind of up for debate because he has to come back. So the journey's not over. The goal was certainly achieved. But I guess we could check in on Mr. Robert Falcon Punch Scott now. So over a month later, Scott and his team of British explorers finally reached the pole. And, they were disgusted and distraught to see the remains of the Norwegian camp as they approached it. Scott wrote, "Great God, this is an awful place and terrible enough for us to have labored to it without the reward of priority." That was recovered from his diary. I'm not making it up. That's I guess that accent was a little offensive, so I apologize, Mr. Scott. But, he realized that he had been beaten to the South Pole, and, that was the least of his worries. Because the British actually reached their destination that far, that late, I guess, into the summer in Antarctica, the temperatures got really cold really fast, and they had to go north as quickly as they could, but it was very slow. And their crew got exposed to exhaustion, and they were malnourished, and they were getting frostbitten, and it was all throughout everybody in their party. They were not as prepared as the Norwegians, which, is a little not funny, but it kind of shows you work smarter, not harder, with the whole strategy of just having sleds and dogs as opposed to all this clunky material that's going to slow you down. So on February 17th, which was more than 20 days after Amundsen's group returned to camp, a man in the British party named Edgar Evans was the first to die. And then another man, Lawrence Oates, followed in his footsteps about a month later by sacrificing himself to avoid slowing down the rest of the team in a blizzard that was coming. Mr. Oates was very badly frostbitten, and I don't mean to belittle his memory at all, but I'm not sure how you slow down a blizzard by sacrificing yourself. I suppose the team wouldn't have to carry him. Yeah, I guess so. Never mind. My apologies to Mr. Oates and his estate if they hear this. Yeah, it's reported that he said, "I'm just going to go outside and and maybe some time. And then he left the tent and vanished forever. So Scott and his friend Dr. Edward Wilson and another man in the search part or in the exploration team named Henry Bowers continued their journey for a few more days, but as it got deeper and deeper into the Antarctic winter, the temperatures naturally would go down lower and lower, and they were caught in another blizzard. But this time they were only 11 miles away from another one of their supply dumps. And sadly, all three of the remaining members of the British team, including Scott himself, would die in this blizzard. Scott wrote in his diary as the last entry, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more." Now, that is very sad and unfortunate what happened to them, but they wouldn't be forgotten. Don't worry about that. It was a very, very courageous thing to do, and it's pretty heartbreaking to think of it from their perspective, as they spent the better half of a year, over a year, preparing and being in Antarctica, which is no fun, and they didn't win, and along with that they died. So it kind of sucks, but that's no guts, no glory. I guess these explorers needed to have this fire in their bellies to let them be the crazy people that would go on and explore Antarctica. So by the time that their bodies were found, Roald Amundsen had already returned home and basically became a legend, even more so. But he was a bit overshadowed by the British team and Scott, who were almost like martyrs for exploring. And they were seen as heroes who completed their mission and died on their way back home. But Amundsen would continue to explore and kind of just go around and looking at, exploring parts of the, technical difficulties. Sorry about that. He was continued to explore, and he actually ended up reaching the North Pole in 1926. A round of applause for getting the double crown for poles. That kind of makes me wonder about a eastern or western pole, which I just quickly dispelled because the Earth rotates. That's why you're not a STEM major, Steve. That's why you make a podcast in your basement. But, it's all good. 2 years later, though, in 1928, Amundsen would die in a plane crash looking for a missing explorer over Norway. So the effects of this race were felt for a long time by many other explorers, and even to this day, their memories are honored by the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, which is a research facility that is permanently in Antarctica to, keep the memory going on of these two courageous men and their teams who went to a previously untapped location and gave it everything they had. And it was a great story about hardship and competition. And I hope that this podcast has provided you with a little bit more backstory on it. And if you didn't know about it before, I'm happy that you are here with me to share the knowledge with you guys. Hopefully most of you guys are asleep right now and you don't even know what's going on. I'm nothing but a figment of your dreams. Maybe your nightmares even, but hopefully not. I wouldn't willfully be a part of that. I want you guys to be well. But thank you so much for tuning into the second official podcast of Sleeping with Steve, the Antarctic exploration episode. Be sure to check out new content that comes out every Sunday and Wednesday. And watch out for other ventures by me in the future. You can follow me on Twitter at Steve Lagore. Or you can, DM me suggestions or requests. Or leave them leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Love to have you guys provide me with some ammunition for what I should speak about next time. So, thank you for everything again. Stay safe, stay sleepy, and I'll see you guys next time.